will be available later on. This will be available later on YouTube. So welcome to our webinar, Winter Pruning for Tree Health. My name is Fran Warren, and I'm the president and co-founder of Tree Keepers of Washington County. Our mission is to protect and advocate for trees in Washington County. We engage with local communities and advocate together to protect existing trees in unincorporated Washington County. Whether we're monitoring new housing developments or organizing ivy pulls, our all-volunteer organization is on the ground working to protect existing trees in Washington County. We're so fortunate to have incredibly skilled and caring arborists in the greater Portland area who share their experience on tree health, winter pruning, and damage mitigation. This is just one of several webinars Tree Keepers has hosted in caring for trees to prolong tree life and to protect property. Please visit our website at www.treekeeperswc.org to find out more about our webinars. In our February newsletter, there was a wonderful article about tree budding. Did you get a chance to read that article?
Yes.
Well, I had no idea that our trees are sending those fabulous new trees already.
Let me see. I'll send it again.
1 second, everybody. Lorette, you're on. Lorette, mute, please. Tonight, our special guest is Dustin Marchello, owner of Tillis Tree Care in Portland, Oregon. I got a moment to check out the 15-minute segment on Dustin Marchello in the PBS show America Outdoors with Baratunde Thurston, Season 2, Episode 4, Oregon New Heights. Dustin's amazing adventure is shown at about 30 minutes into the episode. Wow, Dustin does rope tree climbing so artistically, and his depth of knowledge about forest bathing is amazing. I've read a great deal about forest bathing, and I do believe in its healing powers. When I had a brief phone call to Dustin, he described himself as passionate, practical, and artistic. I believe you will see these traits emerge in his presentation today. When Dustin speaks about trees as living organisms, you can feel his passion and caring. Since those ice storms in our area, many tree owners are very concerned about the perils from trees. We're all concerned about how to reduce potential damage and loss. Dustin has had a unique experience viewing the damage after Hurricane Katrina, examining downed trees, and he has made some insightful observations to help us here in Oregon, which he will share. We cannot thank Dustin enough for making time to provide today's webinar information and for his genuine caring for trees and giving back to the community. Dustin, are you there?
Yeah, he just told me he was there. I was resending the link.
Unmute. Okay. Okay, I'm on. Yay.
Yeah.
Hello, hello.
All right, let me fix a few things. What a lovely group. Fantastic. All right. I'm going to pull my PowerPoint here. Okay. Well, thank you guys all for joining in. I'm assuming I'm talking to the choir when it comes to people and wanting to prune and have what I feel is like a really unique interaction with another living organism, you know, where we actually get to cut on it, you know. So a little bit about myself. I started doing tree work when I was 19 in Las Vegas, Nevada, of all places. And from there, you know, I had a lot of really great, you know, unique opportunities to work. It's being transcribed. Okay. Had a lot of great opportunities to work with some unique properties, people, individuals. And, you know, I had just, after just maybe a year or less, I had just decided that this was going to be my career. Kind of quickly getting into it. I guess I want to preface tonight, I know I only have 45 minutes. I could talk pruning forever. But what I wanted to kind of preface tonight with was in my trade, arborist, we're not actually told how to prune. And we're taught how to prune, like this is where you should make the cut. These are correct cuts. But when someone actually has to apply that book knowledge, there isn't anything really else except for other experienced arborists and their craftsmanship that's kind of handed down. But nobody's actually really taught how to prune. But, depending on who brings you up, who your foreman is, they kind of give you an idea because of their experience. So I think it's unique for arborists and trades is that, every arborist is going to have their idea. They're going to make a different choice. We talk about this all the time. Now, we always giggle amongst other arborists when, we'll look at a tree and go, yeah, which branch will I, because that's the real question. What branch, right? We're talking pruning. What branch do we cut? And so we begin to start seeing this pattern in pruning trees. And there's no real book or anything, but I started to put these things together through my learning and being exposed to places all over the United States and working with other arborists and how they prune. We would get arborists that came from California in Las Vegas, and they pruned completely different than how we pruned in Las Vegas. And it was pretty regional, actually. You would take, Louisiana, for instance. Yes, different set of trees, obviously, in all the places, but there were different pruning styles. And we look at Europe and we look at all these, Japan, right? We have these pruning styles. So again, I think we got to come back to, what branch to cut. So as I begin to start seeing these patterns of deciding what branch to cut and why, then I started to apply that to my pruning. And in a lot of ways, it made me more efficient. We're going to talk a lot about the actual pruning part, but there we go. So we want to have prune with a purpose, right? And there's a lot of reasons to prune a branch. So there was a man named Alex Shigo, and he was considered the grandfather of modern arboriculture. And he worked for the utility lines. And I bring him up because he had an enormous influence on how I prune. So he was hired by the utility company because they prune branches away from trees. And so he really wanted to understand the growth of trees. Like, how do they grow? And he's the one that came up with, and I'm sure we've got some learned people here, compartmentalization of trees. How trees wound off when they're cut. Like what happens? What's the reaction, right? So he started to, basically dissect trees. Now, the power line companies, they want to solve the problem of trees breaking power lines. So they have him give his thoughts, and he had come up with this idea, and it's marvelous when people have these really great ideas about trees and tree work. I just love it. He had this concept of the 90% efficiency, right? So it's this idea that when you have a goal of some kind and you're pruning, right? Because we want to prune with a reason. So we want to maybe prune it away from the house or whatever the reason is. He had this idea that you could make 3 cuts and get 90% of the goal done. And then the other 10% was just the touch-ups. Now, this gentleman obviously cared for trees like no other. He had a passion. He's passed now, but I do have one of his books signed, which is great. Anyways, so he wanted to understand what happens when we prune, what happens when we cut, how we cut, the angle, and all these different things, right? So this is where we start developing these pruning standards that we use now that all arborists are taught, right? Or should, not all arborists learn, but anyway, so there's these ideas of like where we're going to cut and where there's, bud scarring, and where the nodes are and things like that. So he starts breaking things down. And so if we can make just 3 cuts, we're wounding less, right? If we were making like a lot of cuts, that's going to be a lot of wounds. So as I really am bummed about not being able to share this screen with you guys. Maybe, can I turn this around?
Dustin,
see
you
if I
should be
can
able to share.
I know it's, let me see if I have it. Yeah, I put the slideshow together. Oh, how do I get out of this?
You could also email it to me and then I can,
Oh, really?
yeah, that's another way to do it.
Yes, that would be great. Let me see if I can do that. Close. There we go. What's the email? Oh, friend, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I know. I sorry, I muted. Tree Keepers WC@gmail.com.
Tree Keepers
WC
WC.
for Washington County
I got
at
it.
gmail.com.
I just put pruning as a subject. Okay, we'll try that. Regardless, so Alex Shigo comes up with this idea that if we really study the plant and its structure and our goals, that there's 3 branches in there. That if we cut those, that's gonna eliminate. That's gonna give us the most clearance. And he's talking about when I use the word clearance, that's the goal, right? To prune the plant away from the power lines. It works. There are 3 branches that if found, then cut, you're not going to have to prune that plant that much more. There was also something that came along with that. I began to start seeing that when I would prune trees for thinning, and started using that rule because I started to see it. And then I brought that on over to what I was doing in the residential realm. And so that really, with that rule, and then if we go ahead, I use the analogy of a pool table. And we've all played pool before. You rack the balls and then, you break them. And then that break is basically your tree, right? And you've got to make all these decisions. And so one of the easiest ways when I explain or teach pruning is that concept. So I'm going to hit all the balls that I know. Flat and simple. You can easily remove all the dead, dying, and diseased branches from whatever plant you've decided to work on. That's a no-brainer. You can do that anytime. And you are going to see a significant difference in your plants just by keeping up with the dead wood. Now, at some point, the entire plant needs to get thinned out to allow air and light into the plant's interior. And this is important for a few reasons. One, having a little more air and light throughout the canopy is going to reduce disease and insects. So when we've opened up canopies a little bit and have allowed that light and that air, it just doesn't make it conducive for insects and fungal and disease to develop. So that's a really important part. Plus, we begin to start building a very strong scaffolding plant, right? We're really cultivating specific limbs for specific reasons. And when you begin to start working with trees, you're going to actually see like two canopies. There's a false canopy and then there's a real canopy. And you'll see this after maybe a tree has been, hedged over or something like that, but you'll begin to start seeing this outward growth just above. I like to bring that in, right? And we'll see that really with like our Japanese maples, definitely any fruit tree. Now, before I lose my train of thought. So
your slides didn't come through, so maybe I sent you my email. Maybe you can just cut and paste it easier.
Yeah. Huh. I just don't know why I don't have your email here.
Do you want to reply to me and I will send it to Fran? Lorette here.
You know what I could do? Oh, I think I know what I can do. Okay, let me just do it this dumb way. You guys have been so patient.
I love your logger gear that you're wearing.
Thank you. You got to be the part, right? It just when I do that, it makes me feel. I feel like, sure, use mail drop. Okay, let's see if I get it.
Keep going because we could just attach your slides later.
Okay, yeah.
We want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm just so not tech savvy. I guess just close that. There we go. Okay. So now that we're kind of getting back to the pool table analogy, we're going to definitely go through and we're going to cut all the dead out. And I think we're going to, like I said, that's going to be an improvement altogether. The next is like the reason. We've got all different types of pruning available to us: pollarding, thinning, hedging, right? But I feel like I wanted to talk a little bit more about like thinning a tree out, or just making these decisions on creating, like I said, these now scaffolding branches. All right, let me get back to what I was talking about. So then we've got that 3 concept, and I don't want to belay this too much longer. I think next would be this idea of 3 again. When I have a stem that's coming out and I've got 3 branches, there's usually one that needs to go. The other thing that I'm looking for when I am selecting branches to prune are my redundant branches, where I've got 2 parallel codominant stems going out. I feel that one should go. And we'll see that with fruit tree pruning when we decide to select one branch over another. The limited wounding, I think, is really key. So finding those 3 cuts. Now, here's going to be to add to those 3 cuts. Now, oftentimes, we're going to find these 3 cuts this way. When I have to make more than 3 cuts on a single branch, that might be one of the 3 branches that should go. So if I am over pruning a branch, and we're going to see this again and again with this, power line, not to pick on them, power line companies, but it's just a reaction of the tree. It's going to put out a lot of sprouts. It's the other thing that we're going to limit as well when we find those 3 branches. So if we're pruning and I've cut this thing like 3 times, then I'm like, I'll look at it, step back and go, I should have just made that cut. So keep that one part in mind, because you're going to use that to start to learn to find those 3 cuts. And that's going to make you efficient. So to me, when Alex Shigo was showing this, they wanted an efficiency way. And so when I could see that, I brought that on over to my pruning. And so when I go, it may seem aggressive at first. There's going to be some hesitancy, but deep down inside, once you look at that and you go, I've cut that 3 times, and you step back and go, oh, I'll just take the whole branch. And then voila, yeah, cutting 3 times on a single branch probably should go. Dead wood, water sprouts, all of those. Once that's all done, then we can take that 10% and look for where we can just touch up certain areas for aesthetics or for function. I think going back earlier, I think you should have, now's an amazing time to do tree work because we get to see the skeleton of the tree. And I really like that part of pruning in the winter. And so then those 3 branches seem even more, it's almost like it was meant to be nature-wise, because when you have a gray backdrop, right, in the Pacific Northwest, gray sky, and then you've got, an ash, and all you see is just a silhouette. It's amazing. And then you can go, oh, well, let me figure this puzzle out here. And know that you want to just kind of work with the tree's natural structure. When we begin to try to manipulate that too much, then we're going to just increase our maintenance on that plant. And then we need to decide, well, maybe that's the wrong plant for that space. And I see that a lot with people that have planted those cedars way up in Northwest, and now they've gotten huge, and some people have them running between their houses, and you're just like, oh man, this is going to be just high maintenance. So I think that's another part of the pruning process too that I wanted to talk just a little bit about, is evaluating the plant that you're going to work with, and deciding what is its purpose in the landscape. And then we start to kind of go down this line, and then you can start to begin to prioritize the landscape. I really encourage, like I said on the onset, is that having this, you're being a part of this plant's life, and I take people out on forest bathing walks and stuff, and I always say, trees don't lie. When something's happened to a tree, then it's going to make an adjustment, and that's set. It's going to begin to go somewhere else, and we can help direct that growth as well too. When we begin to start pruning, buds in particular, we're much like roses. We're wanting to, create a nice scaffolding and spacing between branches. Anything kind of growing back into the canopy is a dead giveaway that those branches should come off. So again, we're beginning to look at the tree in layers, and we'll see that with evergreens mostly. So I think a lot of the benefits in utilizing or looking at pruning those trees in that manner of looking for the three is you're going to save a lot of time. And then I feel like you're going to also have a set of goals, even though the set of goals is that, well, what's the set of goals? The set of goals is like remove all the dead, remove all the dying branches. And then once you start checking those boxes off in your pruning, because it's really easy to get lost. And sometimes you begin to start really thinking about, should I cut this branch or should I not cut this branch? And you start to have branch cutting hesitancy. And it's a real thing. I see that so much. Somebody doesn't want to just make that cut. And, I feel like you're going to start to really learn that cut before you have to make 3 cuts on it to find it, if that makes sense. What else do I want to say? How much more time do I have? So I couldn't really, I'll send you, I'll get the slideshow to you guys, so that you guys can kind of see it on your off time.
Maybe we could open this up to some questions. I know I gathered three things. One is make sure you know your goal in the first place. The rule of 3 cuts. I do have a question about how do you know what the natural structure is? You say pay attention to the natural structure. But you also spoke about when you see branches going back into the thing, that's another clue. So you have some really good specific kind of rules of thumb, which would help. And I think that getting those pulled aside and listing those would be really very helpful. I know that you also conduct pruning classes.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that we might want to have people do. So if people want to either raise your hand visibly or possibly in the chat, any questions from people that might help prompt Dustin to provide us more information? No? I think that probably the slides will help. I had another question for you about, you and I spoke a little bit about compaction, and you mentioned about the cedar trees between houses. I've been lobbying for the fact that climate friendly and affordable housing rulemaking in Oregon is not allowing enough space for trees to grow to maturity. And this leads to not enough space for the roots. And so then what you get is what they call compaction, and the tree dies because there's just not enough space. We see it a lot with street trees. Can you give us an idea of we know what the tree root's supposed to be, the canopy drip line and all those things. What can people look for? Because you said you have some insights. People can look for potential damage that's coming.
Yes, excellent. So 2 things. that we can consider when we have a plant that's in a challenged spot. But this takes early on effort. One, pruning, we have a thing called root and shoot ratio, where we have a canopy, leaves, and then we've got a root system. Now, they need to have a yin and a yang. It needs to be equal. If we don't have enough of a root system and we've got too big of a canopy, we've got a problem. We'll see the tree tip over. So there's a root-shoot ratio. Now, pruning can affect that. We can get that back into balance through pruning. I think that we could be proactive in looking at more root pruning before trees begin to get too big, so we can really control through human intervention. And I use the analogy of your landscape's a zoo and you take care of it, right? And they need some human intervention. Elephants don't naturally here. They've got to have our help. But I'm glad they're here. And I'm glad you guys all like to take care of animals, because that's what we're doing. Taking care of animals. And some people clean up after their animals and some people don't, right?
Bonnie Robb has a question. Bonnie, could you unmute and ask your question, please?
Thanks so much. Dustin, I can't remember if I've had you out to my property or not.
Okay.
But I have some maples that have been pretty well cared for over the years. I replaced a driveway and now the roots have come into the front yard and they're above ground.
Mm-hmm.
I had someone suggest they were gonna, get a grinder and grind off the roots, and I stopped them. So any clue on tips or what I should do? Other than have you come back out?
I'd love to do that, of course. Well, compartmentalization happens in roots as well as the tree. So we do see roots, begin to put on wound wood
Yeah.
to close up the wound. So we see that when we make a cut on a branch, then at some point the tree grows over it, right? The wound's always going to be there. Other things to consider when we do prune on branches is, the size. But, the reality is you can cut a pretty big branch and the tree's going to be fine.
Yeah.
We still want to stay in that, 1/3 rule of total mass. I don't really like to go too much over that, but I like to concentrate that 35% into 3 branches, and then we can nitpick a little bit.
Okay, appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So Dustin, we see a lot of street tree removal due to what Bonnie was just alluding to, which is the roots coming up to the surface.
Yeah, and they should be properly cut, because so I guess to really better answer Bonnie we could properly cut those roots. And so that's going to encourage the tree to be able to compartmentalize and close off that wound.
So there's been another technique, which was deep oxygenation, because the roots are seeking the surface for oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
And have you ever heard of doing that, where you pump oxygen very deep in the soil and that causes the roots to go down into the soil?
That's a slow boat to China
Okay.
Now what we can do, again, being proactive, we can begin to keep the soil aerated. And so we could do some, vertical mulching. I did that for a long time. I would just get a drill and the auger bit to plant the bulbs. And I would just go through just outside the drip line and begin to aerify the soil there. And I would backfill with peat moss. So now I've got an air spade now, so I can just I use air, subsonic air, and now I'll do radial trenches. I've got some wonderful pictures and stories. I totally brought this one cherry back to life. She was just utterly, I was like, it's compacted soil, right? And so I aerated. Now, that's really not going to change much in the fact of, or, it takes a long time for a root to begin to grow out, right? So if you've already got aerial roots, you got aerial roots. They're not going to go down because you change the soil, just like what a tree does when it grows, So if you've already got aerial roots, you're stuck with them. You could do some root pruning on top, but we're basically wanting to do something for the roots in the future. And I've even seen, like purposeful trenching, where you're like encouraging the roots, like, hey, just right here, this is good. Graze over here. So
Bonnie has another question.
Sorry, one point to my roots. I've been here for 24 years, and I would pay guys to come aerate the front yard. And when I replaced the line between the house and the meter, the water line, they said, come look at this. And the front yard used to be a circular driveway, and there was this heavy plastic that had been put down, and then there was gravel on top. So the soil was never really aerated. So these roots are sort of sitting on top of an old driveway, basically. So, yeah, go ahead.
That's the other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about when we were talking about a plant. I used to be a first aid and CPR instructor, and part of the training was if you walked into a room and you saw someone laying down, fallen over a scene, what do you do first? You assess the situation, right? And then what do you do next? You make sure it's safe,
right,
for you, right? Or anybody else that might come in the room, right? So electrical line, what have you. We're going to apply that same process to our pruning as well, right? So we're going to assess this tree's health. Now, where I'm leading this to is when you walked into a scene and you saw someone there and maybe there's a lot of blood, right? What do you check first? And somebody always goes, well, you check their pulse. And the instructor would just go, no, you make sure they're breathing, because they're going to die before that, right? So when we're looking at a plant too, right? Like, what's its current condition? What kind of surgery, right? Can I perform? And that needs to be taken into consideration too.
Thanks, I love it. I've been a nurse for 50 years, so that aligns really well.
Oh, good. Well, I really feel like going back to arborists not genuinely being taught how to prune, and we're really not, because we're also giving a haircut too, right? And so many things are, is it a pathway? Is it this? When's the last time it was pruned? But again, that's all just time with pruning, but I really do believe in 90% of the time, 3 cuts are going to get 90% of the job done. Dead wood, branches coming in. But again, if we're seeing a tree that's declining, perhaps there's some conditions culturally that are amiss. I see a lot of girdling roots. I prune a lot of girdling roots. And it's so misdiagnosed. It's incredible. I go out and see people's trees, and I'm referred by other tree companies because I do plant health care too. I'll go out there, trees like early fall colors, small leaves, and they're diagnosing it with like, some sort of, anthracnose or, whichever flavor of the week, right? And I'll go up there and I'll look, and I'll just brush away the dirt just a little bit around the base because I can just see it. And all of a sudden, yep, there it is, a girdling root. And hopefully you catch it soon enough where it can be still cut, but that is one I see a lot.
What is a gurgling root?
So when a tree is, packaged, depending on how it's packaged and how long it's packaged, the roots will have a tendency to go around. Or what happens a lot of times is the tree is planted in a bucket, right? And then they put soil way on top of it. And so what the tree will do, the tree responds because it's been planted too deep, and it'll have aerial roots. So the roots will start coming out of the trunk. And that's really bad because then you're going to get really easy desiccation. But again, that's where we see these circling roots. And I've got so many pictures of that where we're able to, and it's so real. It's like, I don't know, it's like clipping that nail, I love it. So it's like, there you go, buddy. And you just see that stress relieved, like somebody's had, a rubber band on their wrist too long.
Ann Wang has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't get my camera to work, but I did have a question. Maybe a lot of the other people on this video have sort of similar problems in that there were probably in our properties, many trees are planted probably closer to the house than they needed to be. And so when you look at some of those like vine maples, they're actually really attractive maples. I'm not talking about like lace, cap type maples. It's very easy to just want to prune so that you prune the branches away from like draping over your roof. But aesthetically, that's not very pleasing. So do you have any tips for how you might want to prune those to shape them without, of course, like, making it look unattractive because they're meant to be a fuller canopy, but they're starting to look skinny because you don't want them going over your house and dropping on your roof. And this is a function of, unfortunately, planting them kind of too close to the house.
Yeah.
Maybe no one has those, but unfortunately, we have a few of those.
Okay. So what we call that type of pruning that we're going to talk about is we're going to reclaim the tree again to fit its spot. And we call that drop crotch pruning. And the concept is reducing the length of a branch back to a shorter branch.
Oh, okay.
And so in the vine maples case, hopefully you guys can see this.
Actually, it's great.
Yeah, no, you can see it really well.
So we'll have a branch that comes out like this, right? Maybe we've got a structure here. And then this branch, and then it's got another little branch here, and then possibly over here, we've got another branch kind of filling in this spot, right? Now, ultimately, the cut would ideally to reduce the length and not remove the entire branch would be to cut this one off, the longer one, back to a much smaller branch.
Can you lift your notebook? Because now, there. Okay, perfect. Okay.
So it's called drop crotch pruning because we're going to be dropping down to like maybe even this crotch here. We might make that cut, right? And now or possibly,
Can you lift your notebook up higher? Okay.
If we're talking about vine maples and we've got a lot of verticals up, then what we can do is what we call a crown restoration. And what a crown restoration is you're removing all the old wood back to young wood.
Oh, okay.
So typically we're going to do the opposite when we're thinning a tree out. We're going to remove a lot of the new growth.
Correct.
In order to keep the plant at a reasonable size. We have to plan for the ultimate removal of some of the branches that we're leaving. We're going to want to leave some interior branching so that we have something to cut back to. This was a big problem for California pruners when they came into Vegas, is they would do a thing called lion tailing, where they're really stripping all the branches out to a small tuft. They did that a lot with the pine trees. It looks kind of cool, you know, you got all these little clouds, kind of neat. But what was happening is just you would have to continue to keep doing it, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
now we ended up with this odd physical structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden, there's nothing to cut it back to get it back. I don't have a lateral branch to cut this branch back now that it's not in service anymore. So we've got this structure here. We've got a branch that's growing towards it. Well, I want to make sure that I've got another branch. I don't prune this branch, because if I prune this branch, then all of a sudden, like, I don't have anything to cut back to. I'm going to have to cut all the way back here.
Okay, I see. Yeah,
So
yeah.
we don't leave a stub, right?
Yeah, I see. Okay, yeah, that would solve, because we do have a bunch of vine maples, but we also have some of those that the coral bark maples that become very tall, but you know, unfortunately they're overhanging. They look lovely, except when they're dropping all the leaves on the roofs. So those
Yeah.
are, I'm assuming we just have to thin out the branches towards the top of the canopy, correct?
Yeah, and we're going to do that by that crown restoration, where we're going to prune real low on that.
Oh,
We're going to look at really selecting some of those older stems and just completely removing them out, and that's going to increase the air and the light. Hi, Marcy Darm. And that's going to improve a lot more air and light into that canopy, which is then going to be able to support more smaller branches, so that the other branches that we did leave after the first pruning, they've got something. So we've got this cycle, this pattern happening,
okay.
where we're doing a restoration every now and then, you know.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, no, thank you. That answers some questions.
Okay, I have a question. It's Elizabeth. I have a number of rose shrubs that haven't been pruned for the coming season. And I'm kind of at a loss as to what to do. A number of them, they're old roses.
Love it.
But they were transplanted. That's the wrong term for me to use. They were brought to where they are now from another rose garden. And I think the man I got them from, he gave them to us. This was the former man in charge of the Portland Rose Garden over in Garden Home here. And so we've got about 15 rose bushes that have been blooming much longer than I thought they would, considering that we're all amateurs, or what I would call amateurs. So I looked at them this afternoon, and we've got branches, you know, that are 6 inches tall, vertical, and then some that are 3 feet. They're just all over the place. And then the other aspect of it is at the base, tell me if I'm shouting, at the base, it's as though there's a whole bouquet of branches from the ground that are just coming up. And I just, you know, during the season, I will go in and just cut them all down. But I just wondered if you would have some suggestions about how to deal with these. And they've, you know, people like seeing the garden. They don't, because I suggested we just tear it up and plant vegetables. No, they don't want to do that. They want the roses.
Okay. I think I know the problem. It's going to sound crazy, but I think I know the problem. It's planted too deep.
Pardon?
It's planted too deep.
Oh.
So we're going to see that as a symptom of a plant that has been planted too deep. We'll begin to start seeing these, what they call like water sprouts, right? The tree's beginning to branch out off of the root base.
Yeah.
So possibly, I've not looked at the plant, but I've noticed that as roses in particular get older, we accidentally keep burying them. We keep on putting more soil on top of them, like over and over and over. Then before we know it, we've got all this mulch on top of these plants. And then it creates this other problem where now we've got mulch that's built up around the base of a plant. And now the plant has to do something about this. Well, we're watering, right? And now that mulch is so easy to work with because it just soaks up water and it's a sponge. And so the trees reacts, it can feel it on its bark and it pushes out roots to take advantage. And we know this because moss will grow in the crotch of a tree and the tree will respond. It recognizes, it can feel whatever, smell, taste, the nutrients of the humus, and it'll put out roots. So that is what we're likely seeing is a response from the tree being planted too deep. It's one that I see, quite often. I always like to see a flare. So I
Flat?
begin a flare. Yeah, a root flare.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dustin,
well, I'll see what I can do. Also, what I've done is use the Starbucks coffee grounds. I've probably given those shrubs of, maybe 4 helpings over the last year of those coffee grounds.
Whoa. Well caffeinated plant. Decaf, I'm hoping.
I
What's
haven't,
its favorite?
I
I
just
think that's
get
so
the
cute that you give the
bags.
coffee.
Yeah,
No, I think coffee's fantastic. It's great.
okay.
But I guess everything in moderation.
That's very well taken.
And so I feel like when we do our maintaining plants, they can't move, right? They're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Adapted to be able to deal with that. They've got a root system, they can move, but they can't really physically move. So I really like to make sure that, I'm monitoring the pin, because if I'm not cleaning up after them, or we don't have enough microorganisms in our soil, in the urban soil, for natural leaf litter to decompose and feed itself and things like that. And that's typically why, we'll do some fertilizations occasionally, and a few things like that, because at some point, the plant uses up the resources, and then it's got to search for more. And natural precipitation is great, but we'll see trees respond pretty well to some fertilizations from time to time.
Well, I can try that, yeah. It's in what I would call a low area. It's pretty waterlogged.
Yeah, that's another big problem too, is we'll get what they call anaerobic soil. So we're getting outside of pruning, which is fine, but it's important because again, we're evaluating our patient, like is what we're kind of really talking about. And I'd love to do another one of these and talk about biotic and abiotic disorders, where we evaluate the plant and we begin to start seeing these symptoms, and then we can begin to start going, oh, I'm seeing this symptom, then I've got some things that it could be, right? So we're going to see the tree respond to overwatering differently than it does when it gets no water, right? So it responds in 2 different ways. When we see no water, we see wilt. When we see overwatering, we'll likely see the tree shed leaves. And we'll begin to start seeing it begin to get that anaerobic soil and suffocate. And we'll see some tip die back. When I start to see the tip ends of a plant dying back, that's a real big indicator that we've got a root problem.
Could you say that once more?
When I see the tips of plants die back, that is a huge indicator of a root problem.
Oh, okay. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of funguses that'll, maybe, verticillium wilt, does a thing that's much different than what, a cultural problem would be. So that's the biotic and the abiotic disorders. We've got two categories. If it's a biotic disorder, then it's an insect or a disease. If it's an abiotic disorder, then it's overwatering, too much mulch. We see lawnmower blight. We call it lawnmower blight because people use an edger or a lawnmower around the base of the tree and they eat up that cambium. And then we get to understand now the biology of a plant, knowing that it has a vascular system that's protected by the bark. And when the bark is damaged, then that vascular system's not going to be able to move materials up and down the plant. So something to consider too when we're looking at the plant, some of these cultural problems that might be there. I get a lot of calls on that, and just like the girdling root, it gets misdiagnosed. A lot of times it's all cultural. And we can change the culture, then we're not going to get as much disease in insects. And that is a concept of, they don't like the term, but it's called IPM, Integrated Pest Management. And the idea is that, we can come up with some ways of reducing pesticide use by making sure that we've got a good culture. Thinned out plant, reduces fungal and insect, to go back to that. And so those are some cultural. Overhead sprays, probably not a great idea.
So Dustin, it sounds like we have a potential for another webinar if you're willing to consider, which is on tree health and the culture and the things. That would be wonderful.
That's, yeah, it's one of my areas of expertise, I think.
The other one is, I also heard another underlying theme here, and that is, it sounds like it's important to get expertise, help when we're thinking about planting new trees or new plants, because I heard that some of these problems originate when we go and have a new tree planted. We may not put it in the right tree, right place. We may not have it, we may have it too deep. We think, oh, we're doing a good job because we're making it deeper. Some of those other things. So it sounds like there's some good help needed when we go to consider planting a new tree.
Yeah, because it put me out of business. You plant the right tree in the right place, your pruning is going to be just minimized. It really is, unless you've got a hedge that needs to be, hi, Patrick. Some of my clients are here. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so I think but we live in a zoo. So we've got some animals we got to take care of, and some, stray cats every now and then we like to feed, and the squirrels and all that. So yeah, it's fun.
Good.
I'm glad I'm an arborist.
So are there any other questions before we wrap up here?
Yeah, Fred, I have a question. I don't know if it's applicable or not, but in this season, Dustin, like in the fall and the winter, it's a good time, you're saying, to prune, specific to fruit trees. Are there ways of knowing what branch to prune and what branch to favor, so for maximize fruit production in the summer?
Yeah. Yeah, that's another that's a whole animal. But what we're wanting to do, and the best way that I can describe it, is when we're deciding to prune on a fruit tree, all the very upright, smooth branches that come up, those water spouts, those come right off. We don't messing with those. Now what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to prune back to a bud that's going to likely flower. Yeah. So then we look at these buds that they just look different, is all I can say. They're swollen. Yeah. And you'll kind of know it once your eye starts to pick them up. It's like an older bud. it's kind of gnarly. Seems like it's been around for a while, you know. That's the one you want to keep. So pruning those back, spacing in fruit trees is just huge. Just branch spacing is really huge. You're going to see a lot of just competing branches, and they're just, you know, they're the lab, you know, of the deal. You know, they're Labradors, those fruit trees. They got to have a lot of attention, or they're going to chew stuff up.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, everybody, and especially thank you, Dustin, for your giving back to the community as well as your love of trees. We
Yeah.
share that love. And we want to save these existing trees, which do so much for our air, for our water, everything. So thank you.
And also,
Yeah.
if he's able to get the slideshow to you, could you email that to all of us?
Yes, I'm going to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the recording and this will be posted on YouTube.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, great.
Thanks very much.